Hi everyone! In today's video, I'll show you step by step how to create a stunning wrap dress that's perfect for any occasion. You'll find the sewing pattern and a list of all the materials you'll need in the description below. Don't forget to use the code YouTube30 at checkout to get 30 off the sewing pattern. I'll guide you through each step to make it as easy as possible. Let's dive in. Let's start with the straps. If you prefer, you can use pre-made ribbons or straps and skip this step. However, if you'd like the ties to match the fabric of the dress, cut 4 strips, each 60 cm long and 3 cm wide. Trim the ends diagonally at a 45-degree angle. This will help when you turn the strap right side out. Fold each strap lengthwise in half. Sew along the edge with a seam allowance of about 7 mm. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and end of the seam. Repeat this for all 4 straps. Trim the seam allowance to about half its width, leaving around 3-4 mm. If you don't have a loop turner to turn the strap right side out, you can simply use a large-eyed needle and thread. Thread the needle with a double thread, leaving about 20-30 centimeters, and knot the end securely. Stitch the end of the strap to secure it. If your knot slips through the fabric, wrap it around a few more times to keep it stable. Be careful to sew only one layer so you don't close the end of the tube. Insert the needle backward into the tube and guide it through to the other end. Once it comes out on the other side, hold it tightly to prevent it from slipping back. Gently hold the strap and start pulling the needle to turn it inside out. It may be a bit tricky to start help it along if needed. Then keep holding the seam allowance and turn the strap completely inside out. Repeat this process with all 4 straps. These will help to close the dress. Once the strap appears on the other side, it will be easy to turn it fully inside out. Start by folding the fabric at each dart with the right sides facing each other. Pin along the dart line to keep it in place. Begin sewing from the wide end of the dart, following the marked line, and gradually taper off as you reach the pointed end.
Be careful
careful not to backstitch at the tip. Instead, leave a few extra threads and tie a small knot to secure it. Repeat this for each front dart. This will give shape to the front piece of the dress. Place the back piece and the left front piece with right sides facing each other. Insert one strap between the two layers, positioned 1 centimeter from the bottom with the strap facing inward. Sew along this edge with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Don't forget to backstitch at the beginning, at the end, and when sewing over the strap. For the other side, no strap is needed. Simply sew the side seam with right sides together using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Repeat all the previous steps with the lining as well. Sew the darts first, then sew the side seams. On the left side, insert one of the ties in the same way, and on the right side, simply sew the seam without a tie. I have a seam on the center back of the lining. Don't let that confuse you. It's just because I used leftover fabric from my lining, and that's how the pattern fit. If possible, try to cut your lining as one piece. Alongside the pattern, you'll also receive a guide on the best layout and the exact amount of fabric you need so all pieces fit nicely. Fold the darts toward the center front and press them flat. Press the side seams flat first, then press the seam allowances open. Always take the time to press each seam after sewing. It makes a big difference in the final look of your project. A well-pressed seam can make even simple sewing projects look more professional. To avoid shiny spots or marks, press on the wrong side of the fabric whenever possible. For darker fabrics, this is especially helpful. Do the same for the lining as well. Press seams, darts, and hems as you go rather than waiting until the end. It's much easier to work with crisp seams and edges as you assemble your project. Steam can help with stubborn creases, but be cautious with delicate or synthetic fabrics, as too much steam can damage them. For tricky areas, use a light mist instead. Before sewing the bodice and the lining together, let's work on the sleeves. Cut 2 pieces of elastic to fit your size. Pin each end of the elastic to the top edge of the sleeve, then pin the middle of the elastic to the center of this top section. This way, you'll be able to sew the elastic more evenly across the fabric. Set your sewing machine to a longer stitch length, around 3-4 millimeters. A shorter stitch can be too tight and may snap when the elastic stretches. If your machine has a stretch straight stitch or a zigzag stitch, use that instead, as it will be more flexible than a standard straight stitch. Start sewing through the fabric and elastic while stretching the elastic to match the fabric length. Stretch the elastic just enough to gather the fabric evenly, and sew slowly to keep your stitches even and accurate. At the beginning and end of the seam, backstitch a few times to secure the elastic and prevent it from slipping out of place. Fold the edge over by the width of the elastic. Carefully stretch the elastic to match the fabric length as you sew, just like in the first step. Sew slowly, keeping the fabric and elastic even as you go. Sew both pieces of elastic into the top of each sleeve this way. Sew the side seam of the sleeve with a 1 cm seam allowance, remembering to backstitch at the beginning and end. The elastic needs to run all the way around the bottom of the sleeve. First pin both ends of the elastic to the side seam of the sleeve, making sure it doesn't twist as you guide it around the edge. Find the midpoint of the elastic and pin it to the center of the sleeve's bottom edge. If you feel it's necessary, divide this section into quarters and pin each point to ensure even gathering. Turn the sleeve right side out so that the elastic is on the inside. This will make it easier to sew around. Sew the elastic using the same technique as the top elastic. At the starting point, overlap the ends of the elastic by about 1 cm and stitch them together securely. Before sewing, gently stretch the elastic a few times to loosen it slightly. This helps prevent it from feeling too tight and makes it easier to handle while sewing. The elastic length was calculated based on a standard elastic, but this can vary depending on the stretch and type of your elastic. To be sure of the fit, measure yourself at the points shown in the illustration to determine how much elastic you'll need. The elastic should sit snugly but not feel tight. Don't forget to add a 1 cm of seam allowance of each end of the elastic. Just like with the top elastic, fold the edge over by the width of the elastic and sew all the way around once more. Repeat these steps for both sleeves. Now the sleeves are finished, this section will be joined to the bodice of the dress. Pin the top of the sleeve's side seam to the side seam of the bodice, with right sides facing each other. Then match the ends of this straight section on the sleeve to the 2 points on the bodice edge. These 2 curves should align smoothly. Pin at several points, if needed, to hold everything in place. Attach the second sleeve in the same way, making sure the seam allowances are pressed open. Sew along this section, starting and ending at the elastic. Use a ½ centimeter seam allowance instead. Backstitch a few times at the beginning and end to secure the seam. Align the seam allowances carefully and sew slowly along the curve to keep the stitching smooth and even. If you need to adjust, stop with the needle down in the fabric and gently turn the fabric as needed. Small adjustments along the way will help you maintain a smooth curve. Sew both sleeves in place. If you're a beginner, pull it down slightly to avoid tension and pin the sleeve to the dress top part. This will help ensure the sleeve doesn't get in the way during the next step of sewing. Take one of the straps and pin it to the end of one of the front pieces. Position it 1 centimeter above the waistline, with the longer part facing inward. Allow the strap to extend slightly beyond the seam allowance to prevent it from slipping out later, but don't leave too much, 1 to 1.5 centimeters at most. Then pin another strap to the other side in the same way. Place the lining and the main fabric with the right sides facing each other and align the edges and seams at the top carefully. Pin them together. At the seams, make sure the seam allowances are open for a neater finish. When working on the sleeve, ensure you only include the lining, the main fabric, and the part of the sleeve that was previously sewn. While sewing over the strap, reinforce the stitches by backstitching a few times. As for the sleeve area, make sure to pull the sleeve out of the way so you don't accidentally sew it in. Only stitch the 3 layers that are meant to be joined. Use a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Make sharp corners where needed. To do this, leave the needle down, lift the presser foot, turn the fabric, and then continue sewing. Sew all the way to the other end, and backstitch at the strap area as well. Press the seam allowance toward the lining and start sewing along the edge of the lining, making sure to stitch 1-2 mm away from the seam. This will help keep the lining in place and prevent it from showing on the outside. Make sure the seam allowances are kept underneath the lining throughout. As you approach the first corner, you'll notice that you can't sew all the way through. Where it becomes too tight, backstitch. Then continue sewing on the other side of the corner where you have enough space to sew comfortably. Backstitch even when you start sewing on the other side of the corner. Also make sure that the seam allowances are folded toward the lining throughout the process. There will be 4 such corners, and use this technique for all of them. If you're having trouble keeping the seam allowances folded, baste the lining in place with long, loose stitches before you start understitching. This will prevent shifting during sewing. Use a slightly shorter stitch length, about 2.5 mm, for cleaner, more precise stitches. This will make the understitching less visible and create a neater finish. Press the seam so that, when viewed from the lining side, you can see about 1-2 mm of the main fabric. From the right side, the lining should not be visible at all. Be gentle when pressing with the iron to avoid creasing the lining or the main fabric. Steaming can help the seam set nicely and bend in the desired direction more easily. Fold the edges of the skirt in by 1 centimeter and stitch. If you want to make the sewing process easier, I recommend pressing the fold in by 1 centimeter first and then sewing along it. This will help you work more precisely. Similarly, fold up the hem of the skirt by 1 centimeter. Due to the curve, it can be more challenging to maintain the 1 centimeter fold, so I strongly recommend pressing it in place beforehand to make the process easier. Align the seams of the lining and the main fabric at the waist of the bodice. Open the side seams flat and fold the front darts toward the center front. Using a longer stitch length, choose 4 or 5. Sew along the waistline close to the edge with a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance. The skirt's waistline to the bodice's waistline, right sides together. Find the center of the skirt's waistline and pin it to the center of the bodice's waistline. Then pin the ends together. Distribute the fabric evenly between these points and pin it in a few additional places where needed. Sew them together using a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and don't forget to reset the stitch length to 2.5. Backstitch at the start and end of the stitch. Press the seam allowances toward the skirt. Then press the sides and hem of the skirt flat for a neat finish. As the final step, finish the raw edges of the waistline seam allowances with an overlock stitch or a zigzag stitch. Make sure to fold the straps away from the rest of the fabric to avoid accidentally cutting them with the overlock blade. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed making this beautiful wrap dress with me. Don't forget to check out the description for the sewing pattern and materials, and use the code YouTube30 for 30 off the pattern. If you love this tutorial, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more sewing content, and let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next. Happy sewing, and see you in the next video.